You guys have the recording?
Yep.
All right, welcome back, listeners. Part 2 to Blanco's Conversations podcast. The topic is, as we discussed earlier, free will, consciousness. We'll go into the individual self, and we're probably going to go down some more rabbit holes. So who was talking last? I can't remember, man. Where did we leave off?
I think it was you.
Yeah. Okay. let's just go into the next topic then, because we were kind of, I mean, it was good. Whatever we were doing, it was
well,
good.
Yeah, we were equally going nowhere fast.
Well, the last thing I remember that I wanted to sort of add to this whole debate, which was, you heard the expression food for thought. We might never get to where we're trying to get to, but it doesn't mean that the food for thought or the debate isn't an important intellectual one, which I think
Totally.
most of the stuff, like, we're not going to solve any of this. None of us are going to come up with a definitive answer that we could sort of write a paper and present to the powers that be and say, hey, we have solved the questions of the world. Here it is, guys.
I wouldn't want to be the poor monkey who does that.
But let's take it to, hanging out at the barbershop. What do guys talk about? They talk about, oh, would Muhammad Ali beat Mike Tyson? We will never know, right? But I think the debate is an important one. I think the conversations are stuff that we should have internally, but also externally, like we're doing right now. I think these questions are probably universal. They're probably eternal, because we'll never maybe really ever figure these things out. But more importantly, I think they help to define who we are as human beings. They help to define our experiences, because these are the challenges. And if you don't ask yourselves these questions, you're sort of missing out on the experience of being human.
Yeah, that's part of the human experience, is to ponder these questions.
Do you feel like because I feel like there's a lot of people who don't ask these questions, and I just feel like life has enough complexity as it is without going that high level. Some people just spend their entire lives making by, or having good friends. So you talked about this barbershop experience and the questions that are asked. I think what's valuable about that barbershop experience is you're just hanging out with your friends,
True.
For some people, that's good enough. It doesn't have to be intellectual. I mean, look at men. Most of the time we talk, we don't normally talk like this, At least not the first
we're all just sitting around having these conversations.
Yeah, no, we just sometimes just goof off, and I think there's something special about that in itself just doesn't make sense. What value do you get from just hanging out with people? But somehow it makes us feel more human. But so yeah, I guess my point is simply that I guess I don't know if these questions define humanity. These are just high level ponderings, but I think most day-to-day stuff is just, it's more lower level, I think.
Sure, I think there's an importance for all those things, right? It's not one or the other. But I agree with the phrase. I forgot who said it. One of those like ancient Greek philosophers or something like that. An unexamined life is a life not worth living, because you lose your autonomy, I guess, in a way, for me, which is you're not really a person or an individual. You're just a guy reacting to the world around you, if you're not contemplating any higher level things.
Or just examining your own life, not even getting into the kind of quote unquote higher level consciousness conversations, but just examine your own life and the decisions and choices you've made and the events that have happened, and to understand, the saying know thyself. That's very important. What does my brain do in these situations? Why does it do it? How can I use that to better myself? How can I override some of these negative thoughts and patterns I have? You can't get out of these cyclical experiences in life that are negative without some kind of examination and kind of like breaking those patterns. And you have to examine your life, otherwise you can't.
I think you hit the nail on the head, man. I think what you're talking about, which was the first thing that I brought up, which is free will. And I brought up the idea of the thoughts, right? People with depression or whatever type of mental illness. Are they bringing those thoughts to themselves? Is it just coming from you? And if that's true, then you have the power to sort of shut that off in a way, I would think, if we truly do have free will.
Well, it also depends on brain chemistry. Any one of us, we can have this conversation, totally lucidly, and then you change the brain chemistry up even just a tiny bit, and it could just, completely just go off bonkers without any kind of ability to overcome it. You cut a little chunk of brain out of us, and then we're a totally different person. So, where does the I'm creating this versus the universe is creating it kind of, where does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. I think we're talking about the individual self. Like, are we sort of an island to ourselves bumping into other islands, or are there connections between everything? Because obviously we can't perceive other people around us, right? We understand that there's other individuals, and that there's sort of this world around us, the universe, right? And we're getting inputs for that. So how much, I guess the question is, does the individual self exist if this whole other thing is going on, which is like other people, outside influences from the world? Could that even be true under those circumstances?
It can exist without all of that.
Again, that's what I'm saying. Like,
right.
Yeah.
You can't have me and not universe all around me. Right. It's all,
I think so. I think you're right.
And you can't have universe all around me and not me until I'm dead.
Right. Or if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? You know what I'm saying? Do we need to perceive it in order for it to exist?
I mean, I think that.
Well, I think that. Oh, sorry, Gerry. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, thanks. I was just saying that. I feel like it's maybe a roundabout way of answering this, but it seems like it's true that we are programmed, and yet is that programming our individual selves? I think it's part of it. So society programs us, right? It says you have to go to college and you have to get a job and then you have to start a family. That's a programming. And I think our individual self is sort of compartmentalized into this ego that we use. And I don't see the ego as necessarily a bad thing. It's just the vehicle that I need to interact with the world. And so I'm molded and I'm shaped. It's kind of like what's his face? Not Carl Jung, his student. What was his name? Joseph Campbell. He would talk about that, how society, chips at us and turns us into a certain kind of puzzle piece to fit the puzzle of society.
Right.
And I think part of the adventure of human life is to find a little bit more of that wholeness of self by asking, what did I lose along the way so that I could fit that mold? So as I was as I was molding into society's expectations, I did that for a reason. But now that I have freedom to explore myself a little bit better and examine myself, what did I lose in the process? And rediscovering that, I think, brings you closer to a sense of who you are as a self. That who you are is not just your ego, is not just your unconscious dark thoughts. It's both. And I think a major goal of our 40s and 50s is to figure that part out, that we divorce ourselves from.
That's interesting, man. I'm trying to surmise what you're saying, so I make sure that I understand the point that you're making. Unless you have something that you want to say, Christian, on that topic.
No, I agree. We're the sum of all of our parts. We can't be reduced down to our thoughts, or just our emotions. We say, we reduce it down to like, my heart, but really my heart is me. There's not a me without this thing in here pumping blood. Or, my hands, I can't reduce myself down to this, my hands, right? Because I'm the sum of the entirety. I don't have, there's no me without the entirety of what I am, including the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, the brain synapses, all of it. So, you know,
Okay, so I think
what
I
is
have
the consciousness? It's the whole thing.
the whole kit and caboodle.
Yeah.
Something popped into my mind because I think I've been watching this show on Netflix, and there's I think a Native American, I guess like a punishment they would do to individuals in their tribe who I guess who are deviant or whatever, which was, you know, a vanishing out of the tribe. But it wasn't just that, because the person would come back to the tribe and they would pretend like they couldn't see, hear. It's like the person didn't even exist. And
That's
that used
crazy.
to mess the individual up. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, which is, do you exist as an individual self? It's the outside world, and in a way doesn't recognize you. You know, me and Gerry were talking about this on another podcast, which is a lot of times you need to just, when you're dealing with other individuals, just recognize that person. Like, hey, I see you here. I understand what you're feeling. So what would happen, I believe, I'm not an expert on this, so if someone wants to comment on this, what would happen is that the person would lose their mind, not because they're so much can't take care of themselves, they're outside of the tribe, but their reality wasn't validated in a way. Like, who am I? You know what I mean? Like, because if I don't see you, if I don't say, oh, Christian, you're this guy, you're a shaman, you're a nice guy, you're this, and that, in a way, you don't exist. And then feeling that way sort of drove people mad. I don't know where I'm going with that. Somebody please jump in.
Well, sure. I mean,
Well, I mean, I exist.
Go for it.
Go
Christian.
ahead.
No,
Gerry.
go ahead.
Sorry.
Christian.
Oh, I was going to say, just to go on that, I exist no matter what you think of me in your head.
But do you
Right.
exist in the same way? I agree that, yeah, sure, you exist, but do you exist in the same way?
Yeah, I mean, you can think whatever you want about me, and I still exist in the same way. Maybe if you think negative things about me, I may not be happy about it, but I'll still exist, and I'll still be, you know, doing this thing that I'm
But
doing.
thinking of you
for whatever
negatively
reason.
is still acknowledging your existence. What if you're not acknowledged? What I'm saying. What if you have no?
I mean, I don't think it's a good. I don't think personally I'm a good person to ask that question because I don't care.
All right.
You don't have to acknowledge me for me to just keep doing whatever I'm doing. I personally don't care about acknowledgement. But
Okay.
Gerry, you might have some insight into that I don't.
Oh, no, I mean, I have a lot of complicated thoughts about that because yeah, on the one hand, I feel like our goal should be not to care for
Right.
other people's validation.
Right. Yeah.
Right. That's a very common masculine goal. At the same time, I'm also a realist. And I know that for me, and for a lot of children, we define ourselves based on validation we get from people.
Right.
So I feel masculine when a woman looks at me a certain way.
Right.
You know, I feel competent when my superiors say, "That you did a good job there."
Right.
As a kid, I define if I'm a good boy or not when my dad says, "Damn, I'm proud of you for doing that." And I think it's partly because knowing myself requires me to almost I require someone outside of me to say, "This is who you are." Doesn't mean that everybody needs it. I think many people do need it though, and we naturally define ourselves based on our environment. And that's why I always tell people you got to choose your friends carefully.
Yes.
Because they're going to define you.
Yes. Yeah.
Whether it's true or not, they're going to define you, and it takes a great degree of wisdom to not succumb to that definition.
Yeah, and I think that goes into what I'm talking about, like what is real. Because if we look at old psychological experiments where, you know, you have a group of people and you're going to introduce a new individual into that group, and they sort of prime the group with one thought, which is this person, let's just say, is a bad person. They're not that smart, or they're not very attractive, or whatever. And then they get into that, you introduce that individual, they start treating that individual in a certain way. But the more interesting is that that individual starts to behave in that certain way. That's what I mean about does the individual self truly exist separated from what's going on around us? I think you do exist, but what you are or how you exist comes from the outside. So if that's why I think it's important to, like you were saying, like choosing your friends, right? If I'm hanging out with people who always put me down and tell me that, I'm negative, I'm going to become that person in a way. But if I'm wise enough to choose the people who treat me with love and tenderness and in high regard, like, wow, Richard, you're a really smart guy, you're a good guy, but like that, that's such a benefit. But I don't know if people have the presence of mind to recognize that, at least probably not the average person. Or am I talking bullshit? Can people just go, listen, I don't care what the group says, and just convince everyone that I'm something else? Is that even possible?
Well, it's very difficult to be successful in this world unless you have the approval of the group.
Mhm.
So there is that, aspect to it. You can just fuck it all off and not care, but you're gonna have a little rockier roads than if you kind of build those relationships and connections and support networks. Otherwise, you'll have a very difficult time.
Yeah, I think that's why parenting and growing up in stable like environments is so important. You know what I mean? Like if you got to really pay
And
attention to how
I
you
think
raise.
it also depends.
Christian, we kind of lost you for a second.
I was going to say, this question, I think, really depends on where you are, your maturity level in life. Because, when we're younger, what people think about us really has a big effect on us. And I mean, personally, for me, the older I get, the less I care what people think about me. But,
Yeah.
To a certain extent, though, you do need people to be somewhat amiable. So you do have to have be somewhat kind to people and things like that, or else you're gonna have a lot of problems. But I mean, if somebody thinks bad about me, that doesn't change the fact that I'm this, cellular being, floating on a rock through outer space.
Yeah.
That's gonna happen regardless.
Yeah,
But it does change your subjective experience of that. Well, for many people, I think, don't you? Doesn't it, Christian?
What's that? Sorry, Gerry.
You might exist regardless of what people think, but it does change your subjective experience if you're not acknowledged. Like going back to Richard's, go to a child, right? A child who does a painting and his father doesn't pay attention to him. That has a major impact, and I think the same thing is true of an adult who works their entire life and they're 50 and they're like, what have I done with my life? What have I done to contribute it? I think for a lot of people, the quality of their life would not be the same, even though you're still Christian. Well, that acknowledgement, I just feel like the quality of life is diminished.
I agree with that, especially, when you're formulating in your younger years, 100%. We really seek the acceptance of those around us. So that definitely does shape us and our consciousness, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Richard, Christian, do you have kids?
I have one child, yes.
Okay, so maybe I'm sure that two of you can relate to this experience where, oftentimes, kids drive you crazy, and so you try to send them to activities, right? Whether it's to jujitsu, to soccer, maybe you send them to art camp, whatever, right? And a lot of times when you send them to these things, that goofy kid, you become very impressed. You're like, wow, you're pretty good at this.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it seems like it's almost like sometimes it's the experiences, maybe not the people, but it's experiences that magnify back to us. You have potential here. And as a kid, it's a father who might tell you that. And as an adult, it might be a mentor or it might be a boss who tells you that. I think, it'd be nice to be able to see that yourself, but sometimes you need to put yourself in that environment so that it can magnify feedback to you and say, wow, you're pretty good at this. And so I think for me, it's about having these experiences that tell me who I am. That's one of the things I love about marriage is that I'm forced to constantly contend with my wife. And I'm like, wow, I thought I was a good guy, but I'm kind of a jerk, actually. And I'm just constantly getting feedback, whether I want to or not, that the kind of person that I am. And I think my wife knows who I am more than anyone else.
Yeah.
We definitely do get a certain amount of feedback from one another. We kind of like a mirror, as the mirror, they call it a mirror in some circles, that the others show us aspects of ourselves that we are blind to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always told people that I don't think that we can accurately describe ourselves. I know that Gerry mentioned earlier, like, Richard, Richard better than anyone else. And I feel like I do know that one. But who I believe that I am, if I define that, I don't think it matches 100% accurately to how the world might define me. So that goes to like what Christian's saying, that we do have sort of
Or one
blindness.
person to another, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely.
Right, because we each different person, we have a different relationship and different connection, and we're different with them. And so every single person may give a totally different description of who we are. Maybe one person thinks you're the greatest guy in the world, another person thinks you're a total dick, right?
Yeah. And it makes me
perhaps we're all of those things in one.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, we are. I know that I am.
Yeah. Yeah, we could be all of those things.
It makes me think of intelligence, right? I've heard intelligence defined to me in one particular way that I could never really forget it. It's very impactful. And I think it goes along to what we're talking about, which is there's really only 3 types of intelligences. There's one where an individual is introduced into a medium, like a situation, and that person adapts to that medium, right? That's one. The second one is that individual is introduced into that medium and they, in a way, change the medium, the environment that they're in, right? So there's one where you adapt to the environment. There's 2 where you force, in a way, the environment to adapt to you. And then the third intelligence where you're introduced into an environment and you have the choice, the free will to say, this environment isn't for me, and you move on to another environment. Have you guys ever heard about what I'm talking about or have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that guy, John Bernanke, he's a professor of cognitive science. His definition of wisdom is very similar to this.
Okay.
Basically, it's being able to step outside of the patterns that guide your life, look down at them and say, I see these patterns, I choose this pattern instead of this pattern. And I'm going to seek out the resources that can help me enact this pattern. So for him, I think wisdom and I guess intelligence, a lot of it is about stepping outside of the river and noticing the river and saying, oh, okay, I don't want to be here anymore. I want to go into that other place.
Right.
It seems like it's really close to what you're talking about here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think that we shape the world around us, that we have a large effect on that. And when you feel like you're not capable of doing that, I think that's where a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, mental illness comes from. But the truth is, whether it's an illusion or not, I could change my illusion. I think I've done it in my life. I've been in places where it's like just kind of negative, and I'm trying to make it, I'm trying to cope. And when I come to a point that I go, it's not going to work, and I try something new, and usually, if you keep trying, things will change. Whether it's you adapt to the environment, or you choose a new environment, or through sure will somehow you come up with an innovative way of changing the environment. But I think the point is, whether free will is an illusion, this reality is an illusion, just the act of trying to do something to have an impact in the world, it validates your existence, and it has an effect on the world. Like I said, that I was going through a lot of troubles, and at 40 something years old, I started communicating with God. And I don't really even believe like in God. I think it's possible, right? And I don't even know if someone's listening when I talk. But the moment
what's your definition of God?
Exactly. I really don't. But the point that I'm trying to make, Chris, is that just me talking to God, and one, I always start with humbling myself, saying that, listen, I started like this. Whatever I'm doing, I'm in the driver's seat. Whatever I'm doing, it's not working. My life, I'm not in a good spot, and I'm falling into patterns, things aren't good, right? Help me, show me the way, be there for me, talking to God about my issues. And that just changed my life completely. Now, is there really someone up there who's manipulating the world around me and making my life better, making me feel better? I don't know, but I'm saying just the fact that you tried has an
Taking
impact.
notes on what
You
you've
you
been doing
broke the
with your
status quo
genitals.
is what I'm saying. You know what I mean? You threw a pebble into the pond, and now there's ripples, and that's changed the formation of the pond. Somebody? Anybody?
I'm
Christian.
waiting on I'm throwing that one to Jerry.
Gerry.
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, you were breaking up for a second, but you're good now. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what C.S. Lewis talked about when he says that I don't pray to God to change God's mind. I pray because it changes my mind. You know, and I think I've been wrestling with this idea for like months, and I always, because I don't fully understand that, but I'm trying to. And I think sometimes even if things are not true, simply when you take the time to think about that in itself is enough. So for instance, a good example of that is, I think I've given this example before of dream interpretation. Some people could say, come on, dreams are just your brain sort of farting, they mean nothing.
Yeah.
And I always feel like, yeah, that could be true. And let's assume that is true for the sake of this argument. Let's assume that it doesn't mean anything. And so when you had that dream about that dog who handed you a sword, that really meant nothing, right? But as I'm trying to make meaning out of what that meant, I'm thinking about my life. I'm like, okay, a sword, what is that used for? It's used for going into combat. And what is a dog? A dog is a loyal companion. Okay, so what does this mean about? Maybe it's about my wife, because she's kind of like a loyal companion who I go into battle with, right?
Right.
Is this dream telling me that I should repair my relationship with my wife? Of course, maybe the dream had nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
But the dream was a model or a mirror for me to engage in that kind of thinking,
Right.
And I feel the same thing is true of personality tests, right? You take a personality test and it says you're a type Z person, right? Maybe it's bullshit, but it forces you to think about it. You go, am I a type Z person? No, I'm not, and that moment of reflection is really important. And I think the same thing is true about prayer. Maybe it doesn't work and it's pointless, but you're doing something that you may not have otherwise done, which is to humble yourself and talk and to reflect on your life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many people do that? They go, wow, I've lost total control,
Mm-hmm.
And so you almost need these metaphors and these opportunities to reflect, whether it be a dream, a personality test, or religion, or God, to just bounce back who you are back to you.
Even if it's just those things, they just get you to stop spinning in your mind, and you feel a little better after them. I think they're valid.
Oh yeah, no different from journaling, for instance. You sit down, you journal, and you're like, wow, I feel better. I made an insight about myself. Someone could say, well, who cares? That had nothing to do with journaling. Can't you just do that as you're walking? I could, but I don't. The fact that I make time every morning to journal, that's really significant. The fact that I wake up every morning and I interpret my dream, that's significant because I'm reflecting on my life. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't do that very often outside of these things. I just act.
Right.
I'm just
or respond.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of people
responding to the world.
Yeah. I think we're all in agreement on this, man. I think that taking a more active role in your life or what's going on internally, and finding meaning in it, right? So for me, it's like with the situation that I was dealing with, it wasn't just that I talked to something that I believed was higher, right? It's that thing, I was sort of giving up control, which is taking a bunch of stress off of me. I'm saying that, hey, you show me the way and help me deal with this. You know what I mean? And I'm going with what you say. And I'm trusting that you have my best intentions at heart, whether I understand that or not. And in there, I found meaning, even in things that are negative. I said, okay, these negative things are happening, but why? What can I get from that? And taking the time out to enjoy the good things, which I don't do very well. I tend to focus more on the negative.
Right, and just stopping this pattern of negative things happening to you, and it's, hey, why are these negative things happening to me? How can I, change, and so that they stop and good things start happening to me. Otherwise you're just, like Gerry was talking about, stepping out of the river, you're just getting dragged down the river in the flow, and you're kind of you're at the whim of the universe. Whereas if you do the introspection and find some tools and tips and practices that work for you, they're very helpful to get you through life. And even if it just gets you to the next day, I think they're all valid, and everybody's different. So one thing that works for you may not work for me, and vice versa.
I think that gets at the difference between something being true and something being helpful. And that's kind of been the theme of a lot of this conversation. Is it true? For me, it's like, that's not really
relevant.
Yeah, to me, is it helpful? That's what's most relevant. So it is helpful for me to believe that I have free choice. It is helpful for me to believe that God exists. It is helpful for me to believe that this dream has meaning, because all these things move me to engage in this higher level thinking that I wouldn't have done otherwise by myself. If you can do those things without that, more power to you. That doesn't work for me. And so for me, something can be quite helpful, and I'll engage in it, even if it's not true, even if I don't believe it's true. All that matters is that it's helpful.
Yeah. Awesome, guys. We're running out of time, man. Any last words for anybody? Because I think this was a pretty good thing, man. You guys were
good. I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, this was pretty good. We gotta do this
pulled
again.
This off in the last minute.
What was that?
We pulled it off in the last minute.
We did, man. We bounded together, man. We did it. You know what, man? We got to do something, because Christian, me and Gerry talk a lot about like manhood and stuff like that. I think that, masculinity in general is sort of like a 4-letter word nowadays. I don't know if you would be interested in doing something like that in the future.
Sure, why not?
All right, man, let me end this, man.
Let's do it.
All right, thanks. We could keep talking after I finish recording too.
All right, thanks everyone.
All right, thanks guys.